15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
Sorry about that. All right. Big fan of your work. A fan of not just, the show, of course, but what you do, like what you stand for. And it really resonates with me. But can you give my people a little introduction of who you are?
Of course, yeah. So I have made a TV show called Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia for the last decade, really. And it's used to be an online TV show. Now it's an actual on television TV show. And I finished making the third season early this year. And this is likely the end of this particular show because it was extremely difficult to make for a number of reasons, but it's available for people in the US on Amazon, and internationally it's a little bit trickier to locate, it seems.
Okay. So this is
about,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I guess it's about the chemistry of psychoactive drugs and pharmacology and anthropology and kind of the entire surrounding environment regarding drugs.
Okay. So I want to jump around, but I want to get into some of the episodes because I love the show. The Ultra LSD is my favorite one. My favorite episode. It was so good. Not just the content, but the style in which your crew films and edits and music and everything, the texture, everything is just right. It just feels right. You know what I mean? And I experienced that from season 1, first show, all the way to now. So kudos for that, for the art of it. I appreciate the art as well. But the message. So I excuse me, I personally have for the first time experimented with psychedelics last year. And I was like everyone else. I was like, no, I would never do that, yada yada yada. And I grew up, I never really did drugs at all, except for like, weed here and there, but I didn't really like weed because I never felt, it made me feel dull and slow and depressed and paranoid, all of the negative side effects. I got them all. So that wasn't my thing. So as I got older, I used to be really close-minded to everything. But as I aged, I started exploring more, and I started meditating about 5-6 years ago. And then I think that started opening my mind to like certain possibilities. And I was having a conversation with someone, and I was explaining what I felt from meditation when I'm really in that state. And they said, that sounds like when you're on a psychedelic. I'm like, yeah, right. Can't be real. So anyway, I did a little research, and it was not what I expected to research, like the information. Because the common notion is that, it's for hippies. It's going to be super uncomfortable. You'll lose your mind, all of this stuff. So, and my father, he was old school, and he was like, he used to try to scare me with drugs. He would tell me stories, maybe he'd make them up, but of people that he knew that the first time they tried something, their brains broke and they're just mentally ill now and homeless and stuff like that. So I was just always a little super paranoid. But anyway, as I got older and more brave, researching psychedelics, it makes sense. So I was in Utah in September, and a friend of mine he's on that level, he just seemed to be glowing. Like he had this certain coolness about him this day. I was like, what's up, man? He wasn't drunk. He wasn't high from weed. It was just different. I'm like, what's up? Are you on something? And he was like, yeah, I'm on LSD. I like, tell me about it. Because I read about it. I've watched videos, but never was I around someone on it, So I'm like, now I can really see what it's like. And he was explaining it, and I was like, yo, I want to try it. So then I tried it, not that day, but a little bit after, and I really enjoyed it, And I did it a few times, and then one time I didn't. I was moving fast, and wasn't paying attention to what I was doing, and I took like way too much, and it took me for a wild ride, but it was good though. I felt like I faced some demons, ran to the demons, dealt with the demons. What I assessed from it was it basically was magnifying and intensifying anything on my mind, and that was really on my heart at the time. So it made it like, it gave me a sense of urgency to deal with it. You know what I mean? So it felt like I had I had some kind of a breakthrough, and it was one of the coolest days of my life, actually. But after that, yeah, I still, dibble and dabble, nothing crazy, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that people justifiably are often afraid of these things. And in some instances, it's probably not so bad, because I think in order to have a good constructive experience, you have to invest time and you have to be in a good place psychologically. And ideally, you have to really, do a little bit of research. And most people aren't going to want to do all that. And so it's a little bit easier to just say, don't do it, because who wants to put in the work? But it's like anything else. It's like driving a car or a motorcycle, or probably martial arts as well. You get out what you put in. And if you invest in getting the most out of it, then it can be tremendously constructive. But you have to go into it prepared. You can't just assume that it's going to be good. You have to go into it open to whatever might happen, and open to the possibility that it might be challenging in one way or another. And in that way, psychedelics are a little bit different from the sorts of drugs people think of when you say the word drugs. They usually think of something that just pushes you in one direction or another, makes you fall asleep, wakes you up if you're tired, makes you high, causes a pain-killing effect or something of that nature. But psychedelics are far more unpredictable. That's one reason that they've been a little bit tricky to integrate into our modern medical practices, because they don't fit into our contemporary medical paradigm. They're not reliable in their effect. They do different things to different people depending on expectation and environment and psychology. And because all of that is complicated, I get why people are afraid. It's much easier to be afraid than to, spend a couple years reading about it to prepare in order to get the most out of it.
I totally get it. So I got a question for you. Well, there's some complexity to this question, but do you see psychedelics as a means for people to explore consciousness? Is that even a thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't precisely know what it would mean to explore consciousness, but I know that they alter consciousness. They change it. And I think that in and of itself can be very useful, just to have a different perspective on your life, because we very rapidly get out of the habit of looking at things carefully. You walk down the street, you just see trees. You don't look at each individual tree, look at the leaves, assess the health of the tree, maybe think about what type of tree this is, how old this tree is this a good location for the tree? And I think that they force people to carefully examine themselves and their environment. And they're not the only way to do that. There are other ways to do it. I actually think, I used to draw a lot, and I think drawing is also really useful, because if you sit down with a pad of paper and a pen and try to do your absolute best to draw your apartment or your house or your garden or something, it's going to force you to look at it far more carefully than you otherwise would. So I think these are tools, strategies for forcing us not to just have this superficial look at ourselves and our environment, but to look carefully. And in looking carefully, you can often recognize things that you otherwise would miss. Maybe you realize you don't really like where you live. You don't like being cold. You want to live somewhere warmer. Maybe you realize that the plants in your apartment are unhealthy, and if you want them to survive, you have to do something, whatever. Just little things that people just don't take the time to notice often. Or maybe you feel unhealthy. Maybe you realize, like, I need to work out more. I need to change my diet. A lot of people have revelations about their diet when they take psychedelics. It's not uncommon for people to have kind of extreme feelings. Often someone will go from eating a lot of meat to thinking, oh, maybe meat is unethical the way I'm eating it, I should be a vegetarian. And I've also heard people go the opposite way. People who had very extreme vegetarian type diets realize, like, what the hell am I doing? I need protein. I need power in my body. I can't just eat like macrobiotic bread all day.
Yeah, I get it. You know, everyone, I guess, develops their own little tactics throughout life, and one that I've found that really helps me navigate is pain. You know, is suffering, and I say that in the means of, like, you know, I write a lot and I write about stress, and I think stress is so good because I can't think of a situation in which being placed under stress that is bad. You know, as long as you deal with it properly, I feel like it strengthens you mentally, spiritually, physically, willpower, whatever. It really it can break people, but it don't have to, you know. So pain has always been something that I go to, and not like harming myself. I mean, like pain, like in training, like running. Like I hate running, so I run. You know, I hate swimming, so I swim. You know, things I'm not good at, and things that are difficult to me. So, you know, I tend to dive deep into that kind of stuff. Just like you know, this is my birthday weekend, and I turned 44. So I used to box all my life, and I stopped early 20s. And then when I was like 39, when I was about to turn 40, I was like, you know what? I got the bright idea to get back into boxing, because I'm looking around me and I'm like, yo, I'm getting soft. I'm from New York. I'm from Brooklyn. I know you live in Brooklyn. And you know, I grew up in Brooklyn when it was Brooklyn, like the cocaine 80s. You know what I mean? So, and actually my house kind of corrupted our block, like in neighborhood. You know, my mother was married to like the biggest drug dealer in New York at the time. You know what I'm saying? So I've seen a lot and been through a lot. But I found that, like, you know, I'm in corporate America. I'm in business. I'm doing good. I'm successful. But I felt like I'm losing my edge. I'm getting soft. You know what I mean? I don't have no formidable adversaries. So I gave myself one in the form of like getting back into boxing, and it's so hard, you know what I mean? So, but I was doing it, getting up, running, you know, prepare for a fight. And even the psychological side of it, the day of my fight, it was a pro fight. It was in New Jersey, Atlantic City. I'm in the shower going downstairs to get wrapped up and gloved up. And bro, I just started bawling, crying. I'm like, why would I do this? Like, why am I putting myself through this? And I'm thinking about the possible humiliation. It's not like me getting hurt. I don't care about that. But the humiliation, you know, my son is there. Like, what would he think? Like, would he be afraid if I got hurt? I'm like, why am I doing this to myself? But then I remembered I'm doing this to myself for a reason, you know, just a gut check, you know, a spiritual gut check, not like, or mental. I don't know, you know, not like a physical gut check. That's easy. Physical things are easy, but things of the mind, that stuff is hard, you know, like mental, emotional pain, that stuff is hard. Breaking a bone is like whatever. But, you know, I try to toughen myself with those kind of things, because life is just like psychedelics. Life is unpredictable, and you never know. We as humans tend to like put so much into other people for our happiness and expectations, and we can get let down like that. So I guess, you know, always trying to, you know, be in a space to expect anything and be okay with it. Has, you know, my tactics have been, you know, putting myself through painful situations, but even psychedelics to an extent, like a lot for me is very uncomfortable, but I like dealing with it for some reason. I'm just kind of drawn to that.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. When I was in high school, I was friends with another very charismatic student, and he was prescribed benzodiazepines. And he was saying to me, you know, people talk about all these different things that are bad for your health. Well, the worst thing for your health, the absolute worst thing, is to be stressed. And that's the real killer. So, you know, what you should really be doing is just taking benzodiazepines, because this will cause you to be relaxed. And that's the healthiest thing you could possibly do. Now, when I was in high school, that sounded like really good advice, and it kind of makes intuitive sense. Of course, stress is the real killer. Of course, that's the real problem. And I remember I contacted a psychiatrist and I said, yeah, I think I've got an anxiety problem, I think I'd probably like to take benzodiazepines. And he prescribed me Klonopin. And of course, it feels great. It feels fantastic to not experience any sort of social anxiety, to go to sleep effortlessly every night. And I quickly, as many people do, became dependent on them, right? Because, but the worst thing about it is, in becoming dependent, I had medicalized anxiety and stress. And I decided that these are bad things that must be avoided at all costs. And if I experience these things, that's a symptom of disease. And so it is my responsibility to eliminate them from my life. And it wasn't until I recognized how damaging it was to use these substances that I had to completely change my perspective and recognize that anxiety and stress are integral parts of existing. They're part of life. And if you try to live a life without stress or anxiety, that will be a life forgotten. You will not remember that life. That will be a life that has no challenges, no purpose. If that's your goal, then you're not going to live a good life. And if you want to live a good life, you actually have to embrace all of these things, and you have to find strength in them. You have to take anxiety and stress as a challenge and an opportunity to grow. That's the only way. And, you know, there's a musician who I really admire named Jonathan Richman, who's probably the only person in the world who's anti-drug that I agree with. And the reason that I agree with him is he's one of very few people that lumps in all sorts of things under the umbrella of drug that most people won't call drugs. So he considers air conditioning a drug because that reduces the suffering of the heat in the summertime. He considers computers a drug. He doesn't use a cell phone. He doesn't use email. He strives to suffer through all of life's difficulties and not use, within reason. Like, I imagine he'll still use medicine if he's sick, but he really tries to avoid all of those things in order to experience suffering and grow from it as much as possible. And he's also one of the healthiest, smartest, best people I've ever known. So I look to him and I think, well, this guy actually gets it. And I do think that if you try to avoid suffering, you will end up suffering more and you will not live a meaningful life. It is only through embracing it that you can grow and have a meaningful existence.
Listen, I'm sitting here, you know, I'm a skeptic, right, of everything. And I'm trying to like come up with a way to negate this guy's position, but I can't, right? I agree with it all makes a lot of sense, right? And, you know, I tell people all the time, I say, look, like I look at stress or anything difficult is like a bully, right? And I got bullied, or they attempted to bully me when I was a kid because I was real thin and didn't look tough. But I knew how to box, and that wasn't in school, and they had no idea that I was a boxer, right? So I would always beat the bully up. So I developed a thing to where like I run to the bully, you know, but I mean that in the sense of my problems. And I tell people, you know, anyone around me, people I care about, like, look, run to it. Because here's the thing, once you get there, it's never as bad. You know what I mean? And let's say you get beat up. Oh, well, it's a lesson learned. You figure out how not to get beat up the next time. But 9 times out of 10 is never as bad. It seems bad when you're running from it, you know? And then they get, just like a predator, a lion, anything, if they give chase and you're running, they're like more turned on by the adrenaline, right? My dog is like that. But if you turn around and run to them, they probably think twice. You know what I mean? And that's just how everything that I've experienced in life, any difficult things, and I've been through some really difficult things, you know, but I run to it, I face it, I deal with it. It's never that bad. And maybe I've made so many mistakes in life that I had to deal with it so often that I'm just used to it, you know, but that could be a thing. But, you know, I just find that it's never that bad. But yeah, so you said that this is the 3rd season, will most likely be the last for Pharmacopoeia.
Yeah,
I
think so. Yeah, it was really, making this during the pandemic was really, really, really hard. And, you know, like a lot happens behind the scenes that you just could never know unless you worked on the show, how difficult it was. You know, people say, how'd you possibly get into this, you know, lab that's making MDMA? Why did they let you film? And the answer on one level is because you know, these people they're very good, trusting people, but they're also very reckless. And by entering into my life, I become responsible for them in some way. So, for example, this MDMA chemist who's making it on camera, right? Such a crazy thing to imagine, someone who's manufacturing kilos of MDMA, inviting a film crew into their home to let them stay for a week and document every step of the process. So what kind of person does that? Well, yeah, a very trusting person, but also someone who doesn't have a lot of regard for their own safety on another level. And I remember telling him, I really appreciate that you trusted me enough to allow me to film this, but I hate to say this, you're going to have to stop for a little while, at least while this is appearing on television, because I can't promise you that nothing is going to happen. And I don't want you to be running an active MDMA lab while, and have something happen because you appeared on television demonstrating this. And he just wouldn't listen to me. And nothing happened to him, thankfully, but he retired for other purposes and it was okay. But things like that are nerve-wracking. And there's not a lot, I don't have control over other people. I don't have control over their choices. And I know that I am on one level responsible for their well-being. Like there's nothing that would cause me more pain than someone, getting in trouble as a result of one of these stories, because I'm really trying to do this to make the world a better place. I'm trying to educate people. I'm trying to, take a group that historically has been demonized. The people that manufacture drugs are considered the worst of the worst. It's one thing if you possess them, some people kind of think that's okay, and dealing them is worse, but making them, that's the absolute worst thing. So I thought, okay, if I have an opportunity to defend one group, this is the most vulnerable group. These are the people that actually need someone to understand their motivations. But in doing that, there's a tremendous amount of risk.
I can totally see that, and good for you, good on you for like caring about these people to that extent. So I can imagine how much stress you carry with you, worried about them, right? So that's a good thing. All right, so listen, I learned about you, less than a year ago, right? And I've been diving deep, watching a lot of interviews. I'm fascinated by your perspective and on these things, and also I'm sure you've heard it a million times. You're able to articulate very complex situations to where we can understand it, like layman's like me. So I appreciate that, and it's intriguing. And the first time, after the first couple of times that I experienced LSD, I was just kind of upset, right? I was upset at like the government or whoever put these ideas in our head, right? That these things are bad and you can't do this. This is a Schedule 1. There's no benefit. What is it? No medicinal benefits, and it's highly addictive. And it's like, I enjoy LSD a great deal, and I didn't feel the need to do it again the next day or the next day, or you know what I mean? So I'm like, yo, who are these people to tell? And if I was to get addicted, so what? Let me, you know what I'm saying? Food is the number one killer in this country. People are dropping dead from type 2 diabetes and heart disease. That's not illegal, we could jump out of airplanes. But anyway, it put a lot of things in perspective. And one of those things was that nobody really cares about us, about any of us, right? Like the government. I even had to stop saying the government. These are just a bunch of dudes with jobs. You know what I mean? It's not some big, powerful entity.
Yeah. Well, they care in the wrong way. I mean, one of the most unfortunate things about drugs is that pretty much everyone is involved with them in some way. So by making them illegal, they're doing more than just preventing access to medicines that could be beneficial. They're also giving themselves an invitation to interfere with the lives of almost anyone they want to. I mean, this is one reason that they're such powerful tools from a law enforcement perspective, because suddenly you have a series of laws that make almost everyone in the country illegal or a criminal of one kind or another. So, it could be as simple as you have a actual prescription for some medicine, but you don't have it in the pill bottle. All right. Well, that's a crime. That's maybe a reason for at least to get you arrested. It's as tools for law enforcement. Prohibition is tremendously powerful, and they've known that from the very beginning. That has been openly acknowledged by people from the Nixon administration, that by making these things illegal, that's just a key to every home in the country, right? And so when people say, I don't think drugs should be legal, I don't like drugs, I hope they recognize that it's not about whether you like drugs or not. It's about whether you like freedom or not, whether you like privacy or not. Because in somewhere like New York City, the Fourth Amendment doesn't exist because it is probable cause to search someone and their apartment if a police officer smells marijuana. Well, the entire city smells like weed. Every apartment building has somebody smoking weed. Every park has somebody smoking weed. That means that a police officer can legally search anyone in a park if there's a wafting smell of cannabis and they decide that it's emanating from you. Now, you could hate weed more than anyone in the world, but I would hope at the very least you don't want to give police officers the right to search you for no reason or to enter your home for no reason. And, you know, it's also not good for police officers either, because I think that it fundamentally interferes with their relationship with the community that they're trying to protect. Like if you're like going to have the most optimistic, positive vision of a police officer, like maybe they really got into this because they wanted to help people. Maybe they really wanted to, like, you know, prevent domestic abuse or prevent child neglect or whatever. And then if your job instead is just locking people in cages for having like a little bit of this or that chemical or plant, think of how corrupting that would be for you psychologically. It would twist your entire worldview. You'd start to, like, because at least intuitively, a crime should have a victim, right? If you're abusing someone, there's someone you can point to and say, look what you did. You just abused them. They're the victim. But with drug abuse, it's a victimless crime. Who do you point to? Who do you say, if you have a little bit of a plant in your pocket, you're the victim, and you also go to prison for it while being the victim? It doesn't make any sense. And so I think the nonsense confuses their morality. Like they get twisted by it. And it's corrupting in and of itself. So I think, like, it doesn't matter what side you're on, pro-law enforcement, anti-law enforcement, pro-drug, anti-drug. You should recognize that this is just not a good system.
I totally get it. And trust me, like I've been through it all. So, like you don't even have to, in my community, you don't have to have drugs on you. They'll give it to you. They'll put it on you. I've seen it. Like I have one of my friends in his room right now. It's happened to him. He had a joint, right? And this was like a few years ago. And the cop said, they said possession with intent to distribute. It's like a joint. Like, how can I distribute a joint? You know what I mean? And that's a whole different sentencing, so, and they slap you with felonies. I get it. So trust me. But do you think that, like, especially around the Nixon administration, there were other reasons as well outside of just giving quote unquote authorities another tool to be able to do what they want to do with citizens? But do you think that there was something else that they kind of feared about people's access to psychedelics?
Oh yeah, there were a lot of reasons. And that's why I think people have a tendency to reduce it to one thing. Was it racism? Yeah, racism was explicitly a part of it. Explicitly in their own words. That's not even up for debate. They have acknowledged it themselves. Right. So you have racism, you have classism, right? This is also just a way of selectively prosecuting poor people. You also have the perhaps valid concern that these substances contribute to countercultural, anti-war, anti-establishment thinking, specifically psychedelics. Now that's up for debate, but I think you could make a case for it, especially in the 60s. You also have genuine medical concern. You have a lot of medical doctors that at that time didn't know. They just thought these things might be dangerous. There was a lot of bad science being done at that time. Neuroscience was in its infancy. People didn't know very much about it. My father had a psychiatrist named Doris Millman, who was a very early researcher on LSD, and she scared my father so much that he truly believed that LSD was poisonous. And I've seen her scientific papers. She had done studies of children who had accidentally consumed their parents' LSD, typically extremely large doses, and had suffered negative psychological consequences as a result, which is not entirely surprising. You can imagine giving an enormous overdose of LSD to a child could be damaging, especially if then the parents freak out and then they take them to an emergency room and everyone's freaking out. No one is supportive. It could easily be traumatizing. So that doesn't surprise me, but that of course doesn't mean that LSD is toxic. It just means don't give an overdose of LSD to a child in an unsupportive environment, probably under any circumstances. So there are a lot of different factors at play, ranging from, benevolent medical concern to racism and a desire for control. And they all blended together along with journalists who are huge contributors in uncritical reporting on this matter, because, journalists just like a funny story. I think there's this idea that journalists are like, have a motivation, like they hate some type of person. But more than anything, journalists are driven by novelty. They like a crazy story. And so they have all these stories about, oh my God, there's some hippies and they gave LSD to their child. Oh no, it's terrible. And look at this person. He stared at the sun until he went blind. Isn't that terrible? And look at this guy. He pulled out his eyes. Isn't that terrible? I mean, this happens to this day. So you have all these different people, journalists who are really, professionally tasked with informing the public, sculpting public opinion, who are instead serving a prohibitionist agenda unknowingly most of the time, because they're just not critically engaged with the impact of their own work. You have law enforcement that is now legally required to lock people in cages for these very, very widely consumed substances. I mean, I don't know what it was like in the 60s, but now the Drug Policy Alliance estimates that 10% of the American population has tried a psychedelic, not including cannabis and ketamine. If you include those, I think it gets a little bit closer to 50%. So this is something that involves a lot of the country. This is not some obscure issue.
I totally get it. Yeah. I want to ask you something about certain drugs in particular. Let's say, well, before I get into that, I want to bring some attention to something. I find that oftentimes, like about 5 years ago, for 3 years, so 2 years ago, I stopped eating a vegan diet, right? So 5 years ago, I went 3 years eating a vegan diet. All right. So people like social media, whatever, like a lot of vegan organizations and whatnot, they were like, oh, there's our guy, right? They thought it was, it was cute to them that this big buff dude is a vegan. But I had to, I was very honest with people, like, nah, I got like this eating meat, you know what I mean? And I lost a lot of weight, which I wanted to lose a lot of weight. So I was very honest with them about it. And also, it wasn't necessarily for like the ethical reasons. I didn't, I don't have all of that information on, how they slaughter and things of that nature. It was just for my health. And I was very honest with them about that. So, but I got pulled into a lot of interviews about it and all this stuff. Now, when I started mentioning my interest in psychedelics, it happens again, right? But these people are a lot different than what I was expecting, right? So I'm in rooms on Clubhouse, and there's people talking about cats or interdimensional beings, and there's a guy, he was talking, we recorded it, that he was from another planet. He was very he sounded very confident in everything that he said. He spoke well. He seemed to be intelligent, but what he was saying was just like, so I was like, well, can you substantiate that somehow? Like, what planet? How'd you get here? What does this mean? You know what I mean? And they all were like defending him, So it's like, it's a whole, it's a weird world out there, And I feel like people want to make things very sexy. They want to mystify things, right? And I just look at everything for what it is. It's something that, I don't have all of the answers. I can't properly articulate exactly what these drugs do, right? But I've read, I've done research, and then I can assess from my own experience what I'm experiencing. And I can tell people that, right? Whether people have these, because the experiences that everyone else talks about, I haven't experienced any of those things, right? Especially like with psilocybin and things of that nature. I had a buddy say that he was on LSD at a concert, sitting in the grass. He moved the grass was like a blanket, right? He moved it off of his legs, and there was a whole city down there. And I'm like, that's not a thing. Yeah, I've taken a lot, and I've never experienced nothing like that. You know what I mean? So, do you think that you think people are being hit differently, or people are romanticizing it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of it is that some people, like you're obviously a really big guy. I think some people they're sometimes called hardheads. It takes a lot more for them to achieve a really high intensity experience. Some people are almost immune to the visual distortions of psychedelics. Some people are hypersensitive to them. So there is an issue of individual sensitivity, which could be based on your psychology. It could be based on your body type. It could be based on a number of different factors. But that is something I've definitely noticed. And at the beginning, I didn't appreciate how much inter-user variability there is. I have a friend that was prescribed SSRIs for many years. He took a antidepressant called Paxil, and he truly requires like 3 times the dose that a normal person would take in order to achieve a psychedelic effect. And even then, he barely has any visual distortion. He still really likes psychedelics and has beneficial experiences, but it sounds like to me, his experiences tend to be much less reliable. And he actually has gotten himself into trouble because he knows this about himself. He knows that he's extremely insensitive to psychedelics. So he'll take these incredibly large doses that wouldn't make sense to anyone else. And then on one occasion, he took such a large dose that he crossed whatever threshold, and he ended up, so afraid that he called the police on himself, and had to be taken away in an ambulance after consuming something like an ounce of dried mushrooms. So, yeah. So, I mean, it's there. You might just be a person who is psychologically skeptical and grounded, and also physically larger than average, and those two things could work together to make you a little bit more resistant. It also depends on the drug. Something like DMT is very visual, and it's pretty common for people that consume very high doses of DMT to achieve dramatic open eye visual distortions that are of the type that when people think of a psychedelic, they think of extreme generative visual distortions. Typically, it's not like that. It's, if anything, it's like a more subtle enhancement or a subtle alteration. But smoked DMT is definitely one that I think its reputation is somewhat deserved in terms of causing vivid open eye visual distortions and in some instance hallucinations.
Right.
But yeah, it just depends. Like my father used ayahuasca, and he's an older man who's very responsible, very grounded in his identity. And I could tell that even though he wasn't having a bad experience, he was fighting it a little bit. He wasn't giving himself away to it. He wasn't completely relaxed. He kind of wanted to keep one foot on the ground. And for that reason, I think he was also less able to achieve kind of visionary effects from the substance. So I think there's a lot of different factors at play. When it comes to people saying that they're from another planet, I mean, that's like, that's like another thing, kind of. That's people that are.
Yeah. I want to send you these clips. I never put them on YouTube. I didn't want to make the guy look bad. But when it's 3 10-minute clips, right? Yeah, I wasted 30 minutes of my day. But I was just so fascinated that like other people were like, yeah, I think that's me too. I think I experienced that too. And I'm like, you don't, like, you don't. You know what I mean? It's like, why you guys say y'all are normal people? Like, what's happening? So I don't know. Like when it comes to like, let's say, all right, let's say people's mind state when, let's say, a psychedelic kicks in, right? And let's think about the power of like suggestive psychology, right? And that would be a therapist or a shaman or whatever. You're kind of guiding that person into a certain type of expectation. And then when, in my assessment, psychedelics would, it seems like it enhances wherever I'm at when it kicks in, right? So if you're guiding someone in a very specific place, and you kind of telling them this is what you're going to experience, I think maybe they start really experiencing that. Is that a thing? Is suggestive psychology and what one expects, do you think that has a lot to do with their experience?
Oh, definitely. It definitely does. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of what shamanism is historically, is helping people reinterpret their psychological and bodily sensations and to try to orient them in a more constructive healing direction. So, in our culture, if you're sick and you want to vomit, that's that. You're sick and you want to vomit. That's the end of it. There's no more to it. You are sick and you want to vomit. But I think in a lot of these cultures, instead they would say, okay, there's something inside of you that you need to purge, that there's a poison, maybe a psychological poison, maybe a trauma, maybe a bad memory, maybe a curse, maybe something. And in vomiting, you are going to clear that from your body, cleanse yourself, heal yourself. And so you can psychologically redirect a negative sensation and reinterpret it as a healing sensation that will ultimately feel more positive and beneficial for the user. And there's a lot of similar examples of that, how you can take something negative and you can reinterpret it in a positive direction so that people derive more benefit from the experience.
And I'm fine with that, honestly. I'm a bottom line type of person. Like, the route doesn't matter as long as you get to the destination. And, I grew up, I went to Catholic school in Brooklyn. I actually wanted to like be a preacher when I grew up, right? Until I got to college and I took world religion. I'm like, wait a minute, right? So I really understood things. But even growing up, like, a lot of things just didn't sit right with me, right? But then I got to a point to where I hated religion. But then I got to a point where I accepted, I get it, and where I'm at now is like, it doesn't matter, what anybody believes, because you're going to die one day, and that's it, lights out. And if something's to happen, it happens. Who knows? Like, why stress out now about something we don't know about, right? So, but when it comes to like, because a lot of people I notice in the psychedelic world, they have very specific meanings for things and the way you got to do this and do that. And I don't really subscribe to any of that, right? Half the time I'm just a fly on the wall, just seeing what the vibe is never like your vibe. You know what I mean? A very practical approach is never that. It's always like, it's so wild. I'll be in these rooms and they sound like normal people, and they start talking about this mystical, magical, ancestral shit. And it's like, it's not really okay. You know what I mean? So, but I never encounter, now once in a blue, I've stumbled upon a room or two with some actual like neuroscientists and things of that nature, but it's very rare that I run into that. It's always the what you expect. And I don't think that's the best thing, because it kind of like feeds into the stereotype that this is what happens when you take these drugs. You think you're from another planet, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, I agree. And it's complicated for me because while I, of course, don't believe those things, there is part of me that finds it interesting. I don't want to spend all my time talking to people like that, but I'm kind of glad they exist, because I think that's just another way that people are. And there's people that have really outlandish beliefs, and I do appreciate that. And on my show, I try to show everything. There's scientists, but then I also talk to a lot of people who have outlandish spiritual beliefs, or they're part of indigenous groups that have spiritual traditions that are not aligned with a scientific materialist understanding of the world. And sometimes people will criticize me and they'll say, like, how could you possibly show that guy who smokes DMT and believes in Pizzagate? How could you possibly show this woman who thinks that drilling a hole in your head is going to have some kind of benefit.
Let's
Like,
talk
don't you
about
realize?
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Listen. You have no idea how many times I've watched that episode, right? I thoroughly enjoyed that episode. I appreciate that episode. Every friend I have, you come to my house, you're watching this, right? That's the go-to now. It used to be the DMT episode, but until before the third season came out. But now it's that. You gotta sit down, watch this. I turned a lot of people on to you, bro. But anyway, does that work? The boring the hole into the.
I would be very surprised if it did. I don't want to say with certainty because but then again, there are things that people do that don't make sense pharmacologically, medically, materialistically, but they have a psychological impact. And I almost feel like as body modification, like in the same way that, I don't know, maybe getting a tattoo could change you in some way or inspire you or remind you of something that you find symbolically important to yourself. Drilling a hole in your head and just to be clear to anyone that doesn't know about this, I'll just give like a very brief explanation. This is a process called trepanation, and it's arguably one of the oldest known surgical procedures. So for thousands of years, people who didn't have an understanding of medicine, if someone has a headache, what do you think is going on? There's demons in your head. You've got bad spirits in your head. You've got something. Got to get them out. How do you get them out? You cut a hole in your skull so that the demon can escape, or the spirits can escape, or this curse can escape, or whatever. So you see this in many different cultures for thousands of years. And then in the 1960s, it kind of reemerged as a idea that you could expand your consciousness and enter a state of permanent, basically stonedness by drilling a hole in your head. And there were a number of proponents for this in the UK in the 60s, most notably this guy, Bart Hughes and Amanda Fielding. And it is not medically verified. They don't recommend people do this. I don't recommend people do this, but they feel that it's had a beneficial effect. Amanda Fielding does. And I think maybe it's just the idea of it could be beneficial. The idea that you are so dedicated to expanding your own consciousness that you drilled a hole in your head, that it becomes a symbolic gesture to show that you care so much that you would do this thing to yourself permanently. So that's human psychology is very complicated. There's a lot of things that don't make sense that still have an effect of one kind or another for non-trivial psychological reasons.
And if you're that dedicated to expanding consciousness to drill a hole, you're probably doing other things in your life to expand consciousness as well. You're probably reading a lot. You're probably around other people on that vibe. Just like when my son was first born, I was big on the Baby Einstein books and DVDs and playing the classical music. And I was like, does this really work? Or is it the fact that we're trying to do everything we can to make this kid smart? You know what I'm saying? And other parents are doing the same thing. Because I couldn't see when I really thought about it, it just didn't make sense that music would make one more intelligent as a child. But maybe, who knows? But who knows? But let's talk about some of the mechanisms in particular. Well, go for it.
Comparison. That's a good comparison, though. Yeah, I think because there's a lot of these symbolic gestures in our lives, and would playing classical music make a child more intelligent? I haven't looked at to see if it's been rigorously studied, but assuming that it has no documented effect, it still has an effect on you symbolically, because it's a symbol that you tried to do something because you cared. And it's to your child, it's the same thing. It's a symbolic gesture at the very least that you tried, that you cared, that you wanted to introduce something enriching developmentally for them.
Right. So, all right. So let's talk about let's say LSD in particular. I've only experimented with LSD and psilocybin. Okay. And LSD, I found a lot more profound than the psilocybin. All right. So one night I had a phone call. It was a late call. I think they were in another country. So it was a weird time, like 9 or 10. And I was on LSD, and I'm sitting in the dark in my room, and I'm having this conversation with my eyes closed. And as I'm talking, I'm not really thinking about what I'm saying, but it's flowing perfectly. And it was as if I can visualize like synapses firing and neurons firing in my brain. And in my head, I understood how I formulated thoughts, right? I felt like the LSD was giving me that clarity for that moment, you know. Um, and whenever I take it, I do feel a heightened sense of brain activity. You know, I feel like I'm sharper. Even like in boxing training, I've done it a couple times and I felt like I was in the Matrix, like I'm cheating, you know, like you guys are in slow motion. So is there something to that? Does it enhance the mind? I see there's some talks about neurogenesis potentially with that or psilocybin. What's there? Like, is that a real thing?
Yeah, it seems that the neurogenesis is probably a real thing. There's a bigger question of whether or not neurogenesis is actually beneficial, because there have been other compounds that aren't psychedelic that induce neurogenesis, specifically one called NSI 189 that showed no efficacy in clinical trials and never made it to the market for that reason, despite having this potent neurogenesis inducing effect, apparently. But there's a lot of different things that they do to consciousness. They change connectivity of brain regions. They enhance connectivity between different regions of the brain. They seem to cause increased activity in some regions, decreased activity in other regions. So there is an alteration of thought that's taking place that can be determined in a number of different ways, from EKG to different types of neuroimaging. So that is happening. But there is also, an experienced awareness of consciousness that I think is very beneficial. It's sometimes people call this metacognition. You're thinking about thinking. And there is, I think, a gradation of consciousness. Sometimes, if you take an antipsychotic drug like Seroquel, it feels like someone is pulling the power plug on your consciousness. It feels like whatever consciousness is, you have less of it. And in some instances, so much less of it that you lose consciousness completely. You're unconscious.
Wow.
If you take a psychedelic, you feel that there is more consciousness, whatever that means. There's a sense of increased awareness, and it alters thoughts. I remember the first time I ever took LSD, I started to think of all of my communication like a computer and this binary code of ones and zeros, but the ones and zeros were positive and negative ideas. And I felt like everyone was just exchanging like positive unit, positive unit, positive unit, negative unit, negative unit, positive unit everywhere I looked. And, is that the case? Probably not exactly, but it was a deconstruction of thought patterns that was beneficial to me at that time for thinking about the way communication impacts other people and the way our positivity or negativity alters the environment around us. So yeah, I do think that they, at the very least, if they don't increase or enhance consciousness, they create an awareness of consciousness or an awareness of cognition and thought processes that can be very useful for self-reflection.
Right. What is consciousness?
That's the question. I mean, I wonder, this is something that there isn't a good answer to. And I sometimes wonder, if it exists, because there are a lot of things that seem like they exist that don't exist.
Right.
Like a good example is, like historically, people know that life exists, right? Life, of course, exists. But if you ask a cell biologist to point out where life is in a cell, they can't show you where life is, because life isn't one thing. And if you read a book about the origin of life on Earth, or there's like an emerging discipline that's sometimes called astrobiology, where astronomers will study the possibility of life on other planets. Well, the first question you have to ask and the first thing you have to define is, what is life? But what you'll find in all of these books is that they don't have a mutually agreed upon definition of life, because it's not one thing. It's an emergent property that is a product of many different things that even as components are difficult to define.
Right.
Metabolism, reproduction, organization of information, isolation from the external environment.
All right. So let me run a notion past you. You're a scientist. This is your field. This is your world, right? I'm a fake ass scientist, right? I don't know. I didn't study this stuff in school, but I study a lot, like now, right? And I actually loved. I was a good student, but I had no specific direction, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I just dropped out of college. But I loved school, right? And I love learning, even to this day. And I spent a lot of time studying things that have nothing to do with my career or direct life, because it's fascinating. But I have this notion, right? I read this book called Sapiens last year, and it was so good. Are you familiar with it?
I am familiar with it. I actually haven't read it, but I've heard it's very good.
Yeah, I would recommend it. So it's basically a history of evolutionary biology, right? And this is what I gather from it. At that time when human beings split from the rest of our of the wild, because we're animals. I tell people this all the time. We're just animals, but we're weird. We're weird because of fire. You know what I'm saying? Like, we got lucky and figured out how to, harness fire and deal with it and put it to our food to unlock these nutrients to make our brains grow bigger and think different. And, there's a lot of other factors, like us not being strong as chimps and couldn't hang out in the trees, and we had to figure it out in the savannas. You know what I'm saying? And be cunning and to not get killed, because we were, as humans, even as there were other human species, we were the more inferior, physically inferior species. But we're here, and I find it like, say I put on the music, like my dog, I feel like I understand life through my dog sometimes. The longer, the older he gets, and I've had him since he was a puppy. He's 7 now, right? So I play music. He doesn't even react. He doesn't get annoyed. He doesn't like it. It's nothing. And I'm like, that is so fucking fascinating to me. You know what I'm saying? Like, how there's nothing there. Why is it so important to us? Whether we like it or not. If we don't like it, it's as important as if we like it. You know what I'm saying? It takes up that kind of resources in our brains. What is so weird about us to where, we these expensive things that mean nothing, right, is important to us, TV, you know what I mean? Jewelry, nice clothes, like none of this stuff has anything to do with survival, but it's so damn important to us. And it's very interesting how what's different about our brains. I know we have more neurons, right, than the rest of the animal world.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The brain is, I mean, I suppose elephants have larger brains, and I think dolphins are about the same. There's also, the cerebral cortex is considered the most important region for cognition, and we have a lot more surface area in our cerebral cortex. The surface of the brain of a human is very coiled and has these gyri and sulci that allow a lot more to be condensed onto the surface. Whereas if you look at some other species, it's much smoother. There's less surface area on the cortex. So that's like one neuroanatomical reason that our brains are a little bit different. We also have, relatively less brain dedicated to things like olfaction. Like if you look at, the brain of a rodent, their olfactory bulb is something like 10 or 20% of the entire mass of the brain. For us, it's like 5 or maybe even less than that. So actually, it's probably less than that. So, we have just different neuroanatomical priorities, less emphasis on smell, more emphasis on cortical processing. But I mean, I think it's really weird as well, because it makes sense to me why intelligence is evolutionarily adaptive and why it would be better to be smart than be stupid. But it's pretty clear, if you look at our planet, that you can do just fine without intelligence. It's not required at all to survive. And why we are so different from even our closest ancestors is mind-boggling. I mean, this is one reason when people are so confident about the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence, I think, like, why are you so confident about that? Because think about it, on our planet, which as far as we know is
we're the
optimized
weirdest
for
ones.
the evolution,
We're the only ones.
We're so uncommon.
Yeah,
the only
Bro,
out of so much life, such a tremendous abundance of life.
You are the first person to say this before I said it, but that's, I always say, like, yo, why do you think they think they're smarter? Like, why? Like, they would be, if they're out there, why wouldn't they be insects or rodents or some kind of primitive life? Because that's all, we're the only one. I feel like it's possible that we're the origins of quote unquote intelligent life, you know? And if we are to expand into other star systems, which I can't see how, but if it happens, is if life ends up other places because of us, I think, you know what I mean? Or we're just in a computer, we're just a simulation, which we kind of are. Like, you know, I sit and ponder about some of these things sometimes, and I'll listen to these astrophysicists as long as I can understand it, and I'm like, and I just start going off into my own thought, and I'm like, first of all, it doesn't matter if we are or not in a simulation, right? Because we're in it. I have a hard time thinking that the simulated would figure out they're in a simulation. Like, I wouldn't design anything like that, right? They'd never figure it out. But I guess it just don't matter, because just like when you're dreaming, that shit is real when you're dreaming. You know what I mean? And life right now is real. So it is what it is, you know? Like, we got this right here, and that's it.
Yeah. It's really interesting the way different people respond to the concept of life being a simulation, because for many people, I think they find this idea extremely depressing. They think, oh, if life were a simulation, then there would be no point. I, for whatever reason, don't feel that way. I think if life were a simulation, yeah, I agree. So what? And if anything, cool, then all the more reason to live experimentally and playfully. All the more reason to explore the possibilities of this simulation. Because if nothing's real, then why not enjoy it even more?
I agree. I understand that totally. But do you ever think about, I don't even know what the word is, but the vastness of nothing? Like, once we're dead and that's it. Do you ever think about that? Like, that's it.
I do. I mean, I think again, it's, for some people it's a very disturbing idea. For other people, it's a very motivating idea. And I try to think about it in a motivating way. Like, yes, I am going to die. And after I die, I believe that the only thing close to an afterlife that I can possibly experience would be the decomposition of my body and my amino acids feeding other life, which is actually like I once had a psychedelic experience, and I came out of it thinking the only real tragedy in death would be if I don't have my corpse fed to dogs, because I really like dogs. And so what better thing to do than nourish a dog with my corpse? That would, at least I would re-enter the circle of life constructively with my flesh, as opposed to just dying and or rotting in some hermetically sealed box in the earth where I can't be reintroduced to the life cycle. But
I'm with you on that. But I want to stop you real quick on the dog thing. All right, so I love dogs too. My dog, his name is Pretty Boy Floyd. He's a good boy. He's a good boy, and he's a fat boy. So I'm looking at him one day. A friend of mine, Amir, he and I were talking, and we're trying to figure out. We were on like mushrooms or something. We're that night we were like destined to figure out society's problem, and we were gonna fix it that night. We came close. But anyway, I started thinking about my dog. Right, we was at a dog beach a couple days before that, and I'm like, damn. We were talking about like issues of race and all of the things that we're dealing with in this country, right? I was like, we think we're so fucking smart, right? All of this fucking intelligence. Here it is, this dog, right? He's not loyal to his species. He's loyal to the people that provide for him, that show him love, that give him food and shelter and cuddles. You know what I'm saying? We can walk past other dogs. He doesn't run off and like, nah, I'm gonna be with my people, But here it is. We're so smart, right? We hate other people for silly things. You know what I mean? When here is a dog, he doesn't even care about species, He's like, I'm with whoever gives me love. And I thought that was very interesting. And we're so smart, right? Learn a
It's
lot,
true.
you learn a lot from
It,
dogs.
it's absolutely true. And our awareness of our own mortality, which is maybe the sort of quintessentially human aspect of cognition, it seems to be the one thing that most people will agree that is not present in other animals, uh, is a source of tremendous existential despair for some people. But I also think it can serve as a motivator. You recognize that your time on earth is finite, so don't fritter it away insulting strangers on YouTube and Twitter, and try to create something good that will make the world a better place after you're gone, because you only have one chance to live.
I love that concept. I agree with a million percent. But speaking of death and the afterlife, it makes me think about the ancient Egyptians, right? And I'm working on a actual thing right now, a docu series, and it's called Erased, E-RACED. You probably get it. So it's about initially it was about stories that seem to not show up in school books, right? In history, especially like Black history. Because my son, I got the idea. He dropped his history book on my desk one day and was like, "This is stupid." I'm like, "Why you say that?" They try to teach that we started at slavery. I said, "Come on, son, you already know what that's about." But it made me really think, like, yo, let's tell some stories that are not told, right? Anyway, so we did Haiti, about the Haitian Revolution. I just filmed an episode in Atlanta, but we're going to Egypt, right? So as I'm researching Egypt, and the fact that I'm not researching drugs or anything like that. I'm researching certain things about Egypt. And I guess the fact that I'm now psychedelics are on my radar, I'm seeing things. I'm like, what is this? What is that? What is this? And then I started seeing like, oh, they were, I'm seeing it looked like a weed plant over their heads, a lot of them on the hieroglyphs, but it was like some kind of blue flower, blue lotus flower or something. And apparently it was a psychedelic, and they would always put it over the head, but they would use it in different situations like sex, like all kind of things. But I noticed it was placed over the head a lot to, I guess, to show an enhancement of thinking and things of that nature. And they had a lot of mushroom depicted in a lot of the hieroglyphs as well, which I never even noticed before. I'm like, how did I not see that? But it just wasn't on my radar. But anyway, it made me start thinking like, okay, what they did was incredible. Hasn't been done again. All right. I think about Mesoamerica, the Incans, the Mayans. Like when the Spaniards came over, they were like, yo, what the fuck is this? Like they'd never seen such beauty with the development and architecture of the cities, right? Ancient, quote unquote, primitive people, right? And I think about like even modern day, like let's say Steve Jobs, it's well documented that he's taken many journeys on LSD, right? Since college. So it seemed like to me that the people that really advance society or civilization seem to have been enhanced by, some kind of psychedelic dating back to like, I don't know, Egyptian times. Do you know anything about that?
I certainly know that many people have speculated about it, and that there are a lot of hypotheses bouncing around. And yeah, Blue Lotus seems to contain some beta carboline alkaloids. I think harmine and harmaline are possibly present, which do have a kind of psychedelic type effect. And I've heard many people talk about the possibility of mushroom use of one kind or another. When it comes to ancient use of psychedelics, I am kind of I try to just be as careful as possible, because I get so many emails from people saying, I figured it out. I figured out that the soma described in the Bible was actually psilocybin containing mushrooms. I figured it out. The soma described in the Rig Veda is actually cannabis or salvia or whatever. I figured it out. I know that the Kykeon of the Eleusinian mysteries is this or that. And you can kind of go on and on. Whereas you think about, like, we barely even know how PCP was introduced to Los Angeles in the 60s and 70s in the United States. Like, there's a lot of 20th century drug history that is not understood. So when people are talking about what happened thousands of years ago, I'm always very careful, and I try to, you know, be open-minded, but also recognize that with that tremendous passage of time, and it's very hard to say anything with certainty. But what I do know is that virtually every culture that has had access to these sorts of things has used them, right? These are tools that people recognize the value of. I don't think, maybe our culture is one of the only ones that has, you know, gone so far out of the way to try to prohibit the use. But historically, the regions that have had these things have prized them because they're extremely useful. I mean, when you think about all the things that we have, iPhones, the internet, podcasts, movies, endless streaming entertainment, music, everything. And the psychedelic experience is still one of the most amazing things a human being can be a part of. Then think about what that would have been like thousands of years ago. I
Oh
mean, it's
man.
not hard to imagine that that
Yeah.
would be the base of a religion.
Nah, I get it. Listen, I'm not religious at all by any means, but I felt like on one of my journeys that I found a religion that I'm okay with, and it was love. Like I felt like I sat deep in the saddle of like my truth. I felt like it's all about truth and love, right? Love and all of the characteristics of love and attributes of love, compassion, honesty, you know, all of the things, the tenets of love. And I'm like, that's it. I'm holding on to that, and that's it, you know? And because nothing else matters and nothing else is strong as love. And I look at like the events of our history, and everything seems to work out. It doesn't look like it sometimes that it's gonna work out. But even like if you look at the history of this country, from the 1700s to now, I mean, things are a lot better for a lot of people, you know, still a lot of work to do, still a lot of work to do. But I feel like even if people, the people that we look at as bad, they want to be good. They want to do, everybody wants to be a better person. That's everyone's desire, right? No one wants to harm people to advance, but they do it because it's easy or whatever reasons they do it, but they don't want to. I don't think that's the vibe. Just like blacks not like getting out of the condition of slavery, it wasn't because we just wanted to not be slaves anymore. There had to be people that had slaves. They needed to be like, I don't know about this. You know what I'm saying? It had to, you know, I feel like love and the tenets of love always perseveres. It may take a long time, but it always end up being the last man standing or women stand, whatever standing. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's interesting, and I found that maybe if I never experienced with psychedelics, I would have got it in meditation at some time, right? But I felt like psychedelics brought me right to that. You know what I mean? In a rapid way, because meditation is really hard for me, right? And that's why I do it, and I feel like I get that. I don't know. I like to call it like the center of the universe when I'm tapped in. You know, I get it maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds if I'm really trying hard, right? But psychedelics, like it'll take me there for hours, you know, and I'll just be alone deep in thought, and I'm just enjoying myself and thinking, you know what I mean? And in a good space. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe like you working out all your life, you've maxed it out, but it's nothing like now you take some supplements and some steroids or something, and you're able to really do it faster or get there in a more profound way, right? More than something you could do naturally. So that's what I kind of looked at the meditation was. It was like, you got to do this, for me at least, my route, you know. And when people ask me like that, when they haven't done it, I'm like, yo, start meditating first, because you can be very uncomfortable on psychedelics if you're not ready for it, you know. And that one time I took like way too much by accident. I happened to be ready for it because I do so much work on myself already with meditation, and meditating is very stressful. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to do. Like I have a busy life. So for me to sit still for 5 minutes is hard. You know what I'm saying? But not just sit still, but also try to block out my thoughts, extremely hard. That's why I do it. I try to get better at it, you know? But and I respect the psychedelics because they're powerful to keep meditating. I don't just feel like I got it all figured out, you know, because I do see the potential negatives, you know, that extreme level of discomfort, or one feeling like their brains broke. You know what I mean? Because I felt
Yeah.
like I've so once I shout out my boy T's in here. He loves weed. So years ago, we was meeting up in Vegas, rendezvousing for his birthday, and I went and got him a pot brownie and like an ounce of like some Kush. This is when Kush was the shit before everything was legal. Now everything's fucking Kush. You know what I'm saying? So I'm looking at this brownie. I'm like, I don't even smoke weed. Keep in mind, I'm like, let me try one of those. Give me one of those. And the dude was a dickhead. He didn't even warn me. He's like, oh, here, gave me a whole brownie. I ate it. It's delicious. I feel nothing. 10 minutes later, I feel nothing. So by the time I leave, bro, I felt everything. It was the most uncomfortable shit I ever experienced in my life. You know what I mean? I was so paranoid. I'm driving like literally like this. Like I feel like I'm gonna die. I felt vulnerable. You know what I'm saying? And I felt like I was gonna get pulled over, get a DWI. My life's gonna be ruined, and I'm gonna get in a car accident and die. Like all of these thoughts. I call my girl and I'm literally bawling, crying, like boo-hoo, like not just tears, but like a child crying. You know what I'm saying? Because I started thinking that, yo, because my father told me before his college, he said, look, some of them kids, they do drugs for the first time and they're stuck. Their brain never escapes that. So I thought like, yo, I'm in hell. Like this is hell. I'm going to feel this forever. I started thinking that while I was high. So I threw that shit out the window. Got home. I don't even know how I got home, and just curled up in a ball and just went to sleep. Excuse me. That was very uncomfortable for me. Learned my lesson. Weed is not for me. It just don't work well with me, you know? But the psychedelics, it works with me. But I do see how it can be uncomfortable. You know, when I took that deep dive, I seen how it can be. Because I'm like your father. I try to control it. You know, matter of fact, I was seeing like a distortion, like the camera was on the floor and it was melting. And I said to myself, I'm not going to say anything because they're going to think I'm crazy. But it was so real that it was happening. I couldn't help but say it. But I was like, look, y'all, I'm very conscious. I know what's going on. I took too much LSD today. I know this isn't happening, but the fucking camera's melting. It's melting into the floor. You know what I'm saying? So, and then I'm trying to type text and the letters are just like moving away from me. I couldn't do it. You know what I'm saying? So I kept fighting it though. And then my assistant, she drove me home and I just sat back in the car and something said, knock it off. Just submit. And then I submitted and I did. And then I went, you know, and I enjoyed it, you know, and I felt like a lot of work was done on me. Do you ever feel like you're getting work done? I mean, you're very pragmatic with this. You have a different approach and you're a scientist. You understand the pharmacology of these compounds, which none of us do. Does it work on you? Do you get work done?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I was in Central West Africa in around Christmas 2019 in these there's a religion there, Bwiti, that worships a plant called iboga. And for me, that was, not only did I feel like work was being done, I felt like that was, the most work that has ever been done on me, period. It was like this tremendous uncoiling of all of these different delusions that I had. I was thinking about all of my relationships and the way that I distort things to make things psychologically easier for myself, how the people that I think that I dislike, I don't actually dislike them. I'm just pretending that I dislike them because I think it's easier to think that I dislike them, but the real problem is that I actually like them, but because something went wrong, I assume that I don't like them because it's harder for me to recognize that something went wrong than it is to just pretend that I dislike, all these layers of weird delusions that people have. Like, a lot of times you think you don't like someone or you don't like something, but what you really feel is that you're afraid that person rejected you or something like that. And you say, oh, I hate that thing. So there's all these layers of delusion that get integrated into our psychology that confuse us and I think causes us a lot of unnecessary pain. And again, the way you can have this sort of psychological uncoiling of all of the weird ways that you think about people in your relationships, it can be tremendously beneficial. That, and even just the sense of gratitude for being alive, because life is difficult, and it's really easy to get caught up in the responsibilities and stresses of quotidian existence, the emails that you have to write, the texts that you have to respond to, whatever, all of your little responsibilities, that you forget what a gift it is to be alive, and something that can cause you to stop for a moment and realize how insanely lucky you are to be alive and have this very short period to enjoy this experience of life and consciousness. It's one of the greatest gifts a person can get. So it definitely works on me.
I get it. We were in Haiti in December, right? And I didn't have any expectations. I didn't know what to expect, but we were all throughout the city. We seen it for what it is. But then for the last 3 nights of the trip, we had an island. We had access to a private island. So we get there by boat at night. So you can't see anything but the stars, right? So one of the nights, we had a good time, but one of the nights, we had a big dinner, and everything that we ate was what we caught, which was cool. So we had a big dinner, and everybody did mushrooms, and I'm with a group of young professionals, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't like just the homies. It was a dope group of young entrepreneurs, people that's really advanced in society. Some of my friends in fintech, it was like just a dope squad, right? And nobody talked about business or money and none of that shit, because that dominates the conversation, it seems like, around, in my normal life. But it was just I felt like, I don't know, whatever spiritual is, it felt spiritual because we were all just enjoying each other's company, having a genuine good time. And then everybody was at least one of the nights, everybody was on a same level. We all had mushrooms that night. I had LSD and mushrooms, but I might have been a little bit more. But I laid down on the beach and I'm looking up at the stars, and I'm like, yo, this is fucking crazy. I felt so special in a way, but also so insecure, because I'm like, yo, we're spinning through space right now. There's nothing holding us together, right? A cosmic event is the slightest adjustment and we're done. It's a wrap, The slightest thing can happen right now and it's a wrap. But luckily, we live such short lives, it probably won't happen in our lifetime, But cosmically, that's not a long time. Whenever these events happen, these catastrophic events or extinction level events, right? But I felt special because I was here, and I'm here, and I'm able to. We're in a time to where, we are the lucky ones. We're the human beings that can, talk about this shit. You know what I'm saying? And recognize that, yo, life is good or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And these are my buddies and all of this stuff, And I started thinking, fuck. Oh, it's like we're an accident that happened. All of this shit is an accident, right? I mean, from what I gather from the Big Bang and everything proceeding after that, it seemed like everything is an accident. It just happened to cosmically fit together, and all the ingredients are everywhere, but the right recipe just happened to be right here for this to happen. You know what I'm saying? How fucking lucky, but are we lucky? You know what I'm saying? I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, it's funny, yeah, because I think a lot of people have this idea that if it was an accident, that would make it less meaningful. I have the opposite perspective. I think that that's where the meaning is that this is so unlikely, that this just could have happened this way, could have happened a million other ways. We see it on all these different planets. Oh, the ocean is ammonia. The atmosphere is methane.
Right.
No life is going to exist there. It could have been that way. It could have been dinosaurs. It could have been a million different ways, but this is the way that happened. And it turns out to be extremely interesting. And we're very, very lucky. That is what is lucky. And to assume that it had to be this way, I feel like that diminishes the luckiness of it, to say that, oh, something made it this way. I don't think so. I think we just got extremely, extremely lucky.
The made it this way thing is just, it's not a thing. Who would do that? You know what I mean? I had a conversation. Unfortunately, sometimes I have these conversations. I never try to engage with people with this kind of stuff, but they want to keep going. And I had a friend of mine, you know, she has a special needs daughter and beautiful little girl. And she kept pressing me about, I need to go to church. And I'm like, look, listen, I said, I got to be honest with you. I don't want the God that would have your beautiful little girl come, you know, come into this world as a special needs child. You know what I'm saying? I want the perfect God. Give me that guy. You know what I mean? I don't want the God that fights with the devil. Like, I don't even understand why he has to fight. Like, just wipe him out. You know what I'm saying? It's very silly things, but I'm just like, I feel like that's the logic. It's silly. You know what I'm saying? But I never go there with people because I respect people's beliefs. And beliefs, unfortunately, are a lot stronger than facts and truth, you know? But I don't ever want to make someone feel like, you know, I've been believing this for 30 years. You mean to tell me, like, nah, I'm not saying anything. You know what I'm saying? I'm not going to be the guy to say, try to overbear somebody with this common sense or whatever to make their belief system seem like a fallacy. I'm not going to be that guy. But sometimes I'm put in the corner to where I have to like defend myself. Like, this is why. I don't want to do that because of this. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the function that religion serves in other cultures just isn't really present for a lot of people in our culture. It depends on where. But I think about my own experience. Like my family's Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed. I had to learn Hebrew. It wasn't spiritual. It wasn't enlightening. There was no philosophically valuable information in my Torah portion. No part of it made me feel like I was really part of anything other than like a somewhat tedious tradition. And the same was true with on my mother's side, it's Christian. Same thing when I'd go to mass. I'd think, is this spiritually moving? I understand the community aspect of it, but is this actually spiritual for anyone here? It wasn't clear to me. But then sometimes I'll go to other cultures like in Haiti or in West Africa or in parts of Mexico. And I think like, okay, this is serving a genuinely spiritual purpose here. And I think a lot of it has to do with the sacramental use of psychedelics, right? Because people really are having transcendent experiences and it's bringing communities together. And in a lot of these areas where they don't have access to, Western medicine, this is how they've decided is best to diagnose and treat both psychological and physical diseases. So I think it kind of depends on where you are, what culture you're in. And also it's, for people that don't have a lot of resources, it can be tremendously uplifting to have this sense of like a higher power that cares for you. Like there is something in that is valuable for some people, which is why I also don't try to diminish it for the people that find value in it. But I think it's our culture for a lot of people, it doesn't quite make sense. And if it were to be revitalized, it would have to be something closer to what exists in a lot of these other regions where you have like a psychedelic experience that brings the community together and is a point of celebration and connection.
I'm not a scholar by any means in religion, but I did dive deep in because I was so interested in it when I was younger. And it do seem like these religions, all right, so you have like, thank you, sir, appreciate you. You're a gentleman and a scholar. It does seem like the religions of the West are more obedience, authoritative, let's say Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And everything else is more, transformative, more philosophies, not just this is the rule. And, we live in fear, right? And look, I grew up fearing everything. Like I believed everything to be literal, like the Bible was literal. I used to be, as a kid, I had anxiety, like, yo, it's impossible to go to heaven. You know what I'm saying? I had to pray nonstop. I prayed at all times. You know what I mean? Lord, please forgive me for my sins. Lord, please forgive me for my sins. You know what I'm saying? So it was like, why, this is so hard. Like, why is it like this? But, it is a safety blanket for a lot of people. And I get that. Unfortunately, the way that it's taught is not okay. You know what I mean? And initially, from what I've studied, it wasn't like that before. These religions were not taught the way that they're taught now, And furthermore, when a leader is giving his sermon, it's just his breakdown, it's his interpretation, and nobody. I was at a church not long ago, just went with some friends, and it was a really nice church out here in it was in Newport Beach, and like like a concert. It was like dope. It was fly. I was like, oh, this is cool. So I'm just ready to see what the guy had to say. I can get some wisdom out of this, take some notes. And what he was saying was just, it was like, it's not cool, right? And I'm looking at the people around me, I'm like, I'm not saying that, but I'm like, y'all are soaking this up. Like, y'all are too smart for this. These are smart, educated people who have good careers, But I guess it's something. Maybe we're the weird ones. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I always felt like I ruined things with my imagination, with thought, as I was a kid. You know what I'm saying? Like, nothing was ever that great to me because I would think too much about it before it even happened or before I experienced it. So I don't know. Maybe we think too much about this shit. I wish that I had that. Certain people have this certain joy that I don't have. You know what I'm saying? This freedom, this free joy. I'd never get that. I could sit through the funniest stand up and I get it, but it's not funny. You know what I'm saying? But sometimes it is. Funny things is like with me and my friends, silly shit. You know what I'm saying? But I get a lot of things, but it just don't move me like a lot of people. And I wish I had that. And I think maybe in that is where the types of people that are more prone to be just feel that full, whatever you feel from religion, maybe they have that access to that joy that somebody like me may not have.
Right. And then also, there's so much predatory religion, or what people would call religion, but it has no religious value whatsoever. Televangelists that are enriching themselves off of lies to milk their followers to, serve whatever purpose, to buy private jets. And you have, people that are preaching ideas that are hateful and destructive. There's a lot out there that is called religion, and I suppose technically is religion, but it's not really a benefit. It's like a form of control and manipulation. It doesn't promote love and understanding, and ultimately disempowers people and takes from them. So it's hard because so many different cultures, and even within our own culture, there's such diversity of what we would call religion and religious experience.
Nah, I get it, man. Even in like, say, social media, right? Like, it's a whole new thing now, right? And it's a thing where millions and millions of dollars are being made, right? So I see it all the time. Like, I look at myself or whomever, whatever influencer, as that's a little microcosm of the world or the country, and they're the president, And the reality of it is, people are sometimes very easily guided, and I ask a lot of questions. I always have. And I think that's the best thing to do, so I can thoroughly understand. But a lot of people don't. They just take what you say. And that's okay, because I feel like, when you're just being a trustworthy, trusting, loving person, you believe what people tell you, because you wouldn't say a lie to somebody. You would, like, I know me personally, I would never stand up in front of all of my people and just lie to them. You know what I'm saying? So when somebody else does it, it's easier to get bamboozled because you're not expecting that, right?
Right.
But it's unfortunate that these people take advantage of that. I see it all the time. Especially in not just my industry, in the industry, when you have, this access to so many people, they manipulate it and use it in very nefarious ways, and it's so disheartening. But that's human nature, though.
It's human nature, and it's easy to convince yourself. Like, I'm sure you have had experiences. I've certainly had experiences where someone comes up to you and say, I'm selling a supplement, I'm selling a product, and, I'll give you this much money if you endorse this or that thing. And, maybe part of you thinks, maybe it's not the best, but maybe it's not bad. And depending on who you are and how desperate you are and what you're getting out of it, it's very easy to convince yourself, why not? It's not hurting anyone. And maybe it's okay. And maybe it's actually good. And I think that's what happens to a lot of these people, is they think, this televangelist, they, like, obviously what they're doing is predatory and unethical, but probably they are thinking, well, I'm providing all these people with a message that they wouldn't be giving me money if they didn't feel that what I'm doing is beneficial. So ultimately, I'm just giving them what they want, what they're paying for. So how am I a bad person?
And there's a thing to that. There's a thing to that. So my great grandmother, she used to follow some guy back in the day that turned out to be a scam, a fraud, right? So he got ousted, whatever. But then he made his comeback. You know, I'm sorry, whatever. And then she kept donating money. And my father was like, "Yo, why are you doing that? You know that he's da 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 da." And he said she just stopped him, like, just shut up. I like what I get from this guy. You know what I'm saying? And whatever that is, it works for her. So it's like, excuse me, we look at everything from our perspective. You know what I'm saying? Access to information and things and people, and a lot of people don't have shit. You know what I'm saying? And imagine an old person who everybody's dead already. Like I kind of experience it with my father now because my father's in his 70s. He's outlived all of his homies, all of his friends, right? So it's just me and him now. And it's a lot on me, right? But I see how like lonely that can be. And he's married, he has his wife, but he needs that outlet, right? So imagine someone who don't even have a spouse, a significant, or a son or some kids they can lean on. So I get it. You know what I mean? I get it. Like it's because I look down on a lot of these people. Like, how could you? You're not about that. But if it is making somebody feel good, there's people that I hate this. There's people I see that their business is teaching people how to run a successful business. Yet the only business they've ever had is teaching people how to run a business. It's wild to me. But a friend of mine is making good money from a course that she took from one of those people. So what can I say? You know what I'm saying? Whatever. It's all, everything works. It's all good.
It's true.
Just like I was saying earlier about how, like say Clubhouse or whatever, the psychedelic rooms that I find myself in is nothing like you. It is more like, you know, the different dimensional whatever. But who cares? They're getting to where they want to go. You know what I'm saying? Everybody have their route. So, you know, why am I judging that? You know what I mean? But I just can't not ask questions, you know.
Yeah,
But
and it's important because if you're not skeptical, you can get yourself into trouble. And this actually has happened with psychedelics. You know, when I first started getting really into this, there was a guy named Daniel Pinchbeck. Do you know about this guy?
I heard you mention him.
Yeah, he wrote a book called Breaking Open the Head. It was like a very popular book when it came out, and he was kind of the first person to really have some mainstream success saying, you know, these shamanic traditions are like the best way to use psychedelics. And
I cut you off real quick. I didn't hear you talk
yeah,
about him. I was
yeah.
thinking of someone else. I'm sorry. Go for it. I don't know anything about this guy.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's not that I'm not recommending his work or saying that it's bad. He was just historically someone that played a role in popularizing the idea that if you want to have an authentic psychedelic experience, you need to go to South America and you need to have a shamanic ayahuasca ceremony. And it caught on like wildfire because now everybody talks about the psychedelic experience in a medical context. They say, oh, it's a treatment for PTSD, it's a treatment for anxiety, it's a treatment for neurodegenerative disease, it's a treatment for this, it's a treatment for that. But at that time, this was before the medicalization had really taken hold. So everyone's talking about it through a shamanic framework because that was the popular justification that people had for psychedelic experiences. So everyone that wanted to have a valid, authentic psychedelic experience felt that they had to go to some South American country and use ayahuasca. And because all these people were, you know, like white people from the US who didn't know anything about these cultures, they didn't want to be offensive. They didn't want to scrutinize another person's culture because they're the outsiders. So they would go to these ceremonies and a lot of them got taken advantage of because they totally abandoned any kind of critical interpretation of what was occurring. So the shaman would say, oh, you know, part of the healing is I have to have sex with you. But they'd think, oh, well, I'm from the United States. What do I know? I can't go to this guy's culture and not have sex with him. That's God. I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's horrible.
It's fucking hilarious. I'm sorry to laugh, but that's kind of funny to me. It's kind of funny to me.
It's I've talked to people and who've been through things like this, and part of me thinks, how could you possibly have fallen for this? But then that's what happens. This is what happens when people don't take their own intuition seriously. And
Yeah.
there were other instances where people were robbed. There was a teenager named Kyle Nolan who was killed. And it wasn't until all these bad things started to make it into the media that suddenly people started to say, oh, wait a second. I actually went to one of these ceremonies with that guy that killed someone. He told me he was a Martian, but I didn't know I was too afraid of being offensive, so I didn't want to question
Right.
it. And I just said, "Oh yeah, yes, you are a Martian, of course." So that's what happened,
Yeah.
and that's why that was so dangerous.
Yeah, I see it, man. Like, I legalization of everything, like letting everything be out there and some proper education on everything would be the best case scenario, because you can't, the war on drugs win. They won. You can't stop it, right? Like, you're not going to stop people from finding things to give them an escape or knock the edge off. You're not going to do it. Sorry, it's not happening. Drugs won. So they need to, I wish the process was expedited, because what you're talking about is so real and people are so easily guided. I can tell somebody, yeah, you need to take 12 grams of psilocybin and, what I'm saying, come with me and give me a bank card, anything, right? And people will do it because they're so impressionable and they want these experiences. And people they're very charismatic with, even when I'm explaining my experience to people, they're in awe, like, because, it sounds like, wow, I want to experience something like that. You want that, so it's like you start creating a scenario for yourself and making it pleasurable and pleasant, and like you're becoming open to it. But I could be making these things up, you know what I'm saying? And I'm listening to people a lot of times and I feel like they're making things up, and people love talking, and especially in certain formats, other people are just giving them a little praise. And I'll like go and look at these people's Instagram and there'll be no followers, not many followers. And it matters for certain things. So, and I say, okay, this is why he's getting a little life over here. So he can't stop, he's feeling good. And they're creating, as we speak, they're creating this whole new persona that somebody might subscribe to and just do whatever they say. I feel like if it was just legal, if it was normalized, it would be a lot safer. We can weed out. Where was it? It's somewhere. I think in Europe they have places where you can test like drugs that you get to make sure it's pure, like MDMA or whatever, and it'll give you a readout, within minutes or something like that. Are you familiar with that? You heard of that?
Yeah. There's a lot of testing organizations in Europe, like Dance Safe, that provide those services, and it's tremendously valuable because a lot of the harms that people associate with drugs are just harms associated with ignorance, with not knowing what you're taking. If you don't know the dose or identity of the drug that you're taking, you're setting yourself up to have a bad experience, and that's the way most people go into a drug experience.
No, that's true. And I mean, my guy that I've gotten stuff from before, I trust him. But why? Why do I trust him? How did I initially get that trust? I didn't test his stuff. You know what I'm saying? It could have been anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's real. I feel like it seems like we're moving towards legalization of everything, but I don't know. Are we? What do you think?
I certainly, I mean, it's happening slowly with psychedelics. You have decriminalization in Somerville, Massachusetts, and Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in Oregon, you have statewide decriminalization of psychedelics and a provision for medical use. I think there's somewhere Oakland as well in California. Yeah. So
it's decriminalized all over California. It's decriminalized,
and that's something. I mean, it's not enough, but it's a step in the right direction. And what we really need is just, I think what the part that everyone can play in this is just having these sorts of conversations and trying to talk to people that you disagree with and listen to what they think and try to gently inform them, because the more people that support this, the easier it will be to stop all of these problems of people being locked in cages, of people consuming contaminated drugs that potentially are responsible for their death. I mean, there's so much harm that we blame on drugs that is actually a product of prohibition. And I think once we get rid of all this stupidity, then we can actually start to seriously talk about what potential these things have as medicines.
One thing I really like about your show is that I'm showing someone this, like certain episodes, I'm like, you never thought like such nice people would be, you know, the guys creating these compounds, these drugs, right? They're like, nah, you know, like my favorite episode is the Ultra LSD episode. Like the guy in the beginning, I don't know anybody's name. The very first guy with the 3D goggles.
Yes.
Him, Amanda, I love her. Her name's Amanda, right?
Yeah.
I love that lady. I love the story about her pigeon. I got it. I get it. It makes so much sense. You know what I'm saying? It's such a dope story. And the other guy, like the only guy, for I guess for a while, he was the only one that was allowed to synthesize LSD. It's like, these are not what y'all think are the people creating these drugs. These are nice people. These are smart people. These are ethical people. And these people have good intentions for doing it. You know what I'm saying? I love that you show that. And you're not even trying. You're just exposing it for what it is. But it's really nice people behind this stuff. You know what I'm saying? And people need to see that.
Oh, absolutely. Because years ago, I worked on a National Geographic show called Drugs Inc. It's kind of like a garbage, typical television show. And, you know, I just saw the way typical television about drugs is made. And they don't care about showing things in a positive light. You know, they want it to look bad. They think that's unbiased journalism, is you have to make it look kind of bad. So they'll take some nice guy who's delivering weed in New York City, lives in Brooklyn, just paying the bills, like whatever. It's not a bad thing. But then they're like, he's a kingpin dealer selling $5,000 worth of drugs a day. And he's a one-stop shop for mushrooms and weed.
You do this too good.
Like,
you doing it too good.
It's like, why are you making this guy seem like a bad dude? He's like a really nice man.
They're being so weird about it. Yeah. But see, here's the thing. Are people getting smart enough to see it for what it is, though? Like, I was showing somebody something about cops, right? Like, cops it was a marketing campaign to make black men look like criminals, right? I'm like, look, these guys are running. He's what? He got some weed in his pocket, or he's a shoplifter. Like, is that a real crime? Is that like, does that warrant being on TV? You know what I'm saying? When people really, do you think that, I want to say that people's consciousness is rising collectively, but I don't know. After this last election cycle, I've seen so much silly stuff on social media. I don't know. I feel like people really regress fast. You know what I'm saying? When I feel like, all right, people are getting smart. They're seeing things for what they are. And then I'll just see, bam, a tank. However, I find myself in hostile territory all the time because I'm not an echo chamber guy. I'm like, hey, so what? Why do you think that? So I start dialogue. And when I give real rational, normal breakdowns of certain things, they're usually like, yeah, that's real. Okay. You know what I mean? When people let go of their feelings about certain things that they don't even know why they're so stuck on, you know? But I wish that people didn't need that. Like, I wish that people just got it on their own, and, you know, collectively people were just starting to wake up. You know, I wish that was happening. I like to think that that's happening, but I'm not super optimistic about it, but I'm not pessimistic about it either.
Yeah. I mean, I think that culturally, you know, this is such an amazing time to be alive in terms of the internet is the greatest educational tool that has ever been devised. And there's so much potential for people to educate themselves. Like, for the first time in history, you truly can get like a world-class education just sitting in your apartment for free if you want to. The only limitation is your own drive for knowledge. And it's when people get lazy in one direction or another and they decide, oh, this is the way vaccinations are, this is the way politics are, and it's like, no, put in the work. Like, put in the work. This is an amazing time to read. You can download 10,000 textbooks. You can read 5,000 textbooks on vaccines if you want. You can become an expert on vaccines and you have access to the best information if you want it. It's just your responsibility to have that curiosity. So I think, people just need to embrace the responsibility of learning.
I agree with you, but we still are looking at it from our lens, right? And the reality of most people is they don't even have time to think about that shit. You know what I'm saying? So they need somebody to feed it to them because they're working overtime. They got to travel to work. The commute sucks to get back, whatever, dealing with their badass kids. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh man, I don't get no time for me. I got a good life and I feel like I don't get time for me. You know what I'm saying? So I can see how, look, I'm over here, like my problems is trying to figure out when I can take keyboard lessons. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's people that's not reality for most people to educate themselves to that extent. So they just feed it to them, and they're just receptive to it, which is to me or you, it may be like, how could you just believe that? But people are just kind of wired like that. They're hardwired like that, I mean, it's more sheep than shepherds, right?
Right. Well, then I guess then you're right. Of course, that is a limitation. And I guess the next best thing is if you can't invest in learning about these things, then you have to become comfortable with the limitations of your own knowledge and not be certain about things that you don't know about. Right. But that's okay as well. Yeah, you don't need to pretend to be an expert on something that you don't know about. Like take climate change, for example. Like I am not an expert on climate science, but I see that there's a scientific consensus that climate change is real. I would be lying if I told you that I have gone through thousands of studies on climate change and that I can say with perfect certainty that everything that you hear is true, because most people just don't have the time, like you said, to go that deep into it. Or if you have the time, you can only do it on a certain number of things. For me, maybe it's psychedelics. For someone else, maybe it's nutrition or something else.
Right.
So then you have to become comfortable with your own uncertainty and not claim to be knowledgeable about things you don't know about, because that's another big problem is you have people that don't know anything about anything that are spouting certain information.
It's so weird. It's so weird. Yeah. That's so weird. Yeah. Like, listen, it's a lot easier to not know because there's a lot that I do not know, and I'm very honest about it. And I get to have conversations with gentlemen like yourself, and I learn a lot. I have many science friends in the scientific community, high level academia, and I'm not there, you know what I mean? But we have good talks because I'm honest about it and I want to learn, and I'm fascinated. And also, I do my little research on my own, and I offer sometimes a different perspective that maybe they're not thinking about, so, but it's all fascinating. Life is fascinating. It's all fascinating. It all matters and it don't matter. You know what I'm saying? It's all good and it's not whatever on anything. Some of your episodes is playing right here in the background, but some of the episodes of Pharmacopoeia, I be trying to like gauge to see if some of these shamans or whatever are legit, like if they care about you. You know what I'm saying? Like, is this motherfucker real or is he just trying to get over? You know what I'm saying? I've actually tried to assess that, and it seemed like I don't know, it's just my own imagination of what it is, but it's very interesting. The show is dope, and I'm kind of sad that it's over. I was sad that I'm kind of glad that I found it so late because I got to like binge watch. You know what I mean? But I'm sad that it's over.
It's over, but I'm still making things, and a lot of people have been writing to me saying like, don't stop. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to be, doing chemistry work full time. I'm going to be doing the same stuff that I've always done, but I have a podcast, at patreon.com/Hamilton Morris. I'll continue writing, I'll continue creating stuff, and I'll be able to focus more on science. And then, I'll still do stuff in the future as well. This is just what I'm going to do for a little while because I have a lot of opportunities right now to focus on science, and it just makes sense for me.
Right, no doubt. Listen, I'm gonna cut it because we got so much to do, and I don't want to take too much of your time. You're very kind for giving me your time today, and I know you're just being nice. You probably want to have left like an hour ago. I don't want to
No,
hog
no,
your,
it's a
all your
pleasure. It's
time.
been great talking to you.
Yeah, no, it's good. I could do this all day, but I listen. I'm a fan. I'm an admirer of. You're a man of great intellect. You know your shit, and I like that. And you can tell people get a real sense that you really give a fuck, that you really care. You know, and that's what I think. That's what your magnetic attraction is. That you're a good dude. You're powerful in the sense that you know so much in your field, and man, it's like I'm as fascinated by intellectuals as I am watching like Mike Tyson greatest hits. You know what I'm saying? Like it's that fascinating to me. Like I love that shit. So yeah, full support. However I can help with anything, I'm all there for it.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. And it was a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, likewise. All right, sir. And that's it. We'll talk to you next time.